Billionaire sets up cameras to catch his waitress, but sees her caring for her Alzheimer's mom. What if the person you trusted most was quietly stealing from you? And what if discovering the truth changed everything you thought you knew about kindness? Thomas Mitchell had built his fortune by reading people, but at 72 he wondered if he was losing his touch. For 3 months, money had been disappearing from his restaurant's register, small amounts that most wouldn't notice. But Thomas noticed everything. The prime suspect was Linda Rodriguez, a 48-year-old waitress who'd worked at his downtown diner for 2 years. She was always the last to leave, always volunteering for extra shifts, always finding reasons to stay near the cash register. Thomas had given her chances, hoping his instincts were wrong. But the evidence kept mounting. Tonight, he'd finally installed hidden cameras throughout the restaurant. By morning, he'd have his proof. But sometimes the truth isn't what we expect. And sometimes our hearts know things our minds haven't figured out yet. Where are you watching from tonight? Thomas had opened Mitchell's Diner 43 years ago with nothing but a dream and his late wife's recipe for apple pie. The little restaurant on Maple Street had seen him through bankruptcy, success, heartbreak, and triumph. He'd fed 3 generations of families, watched children grow up and bring their own kids for Sunday breakfast. The red vinyl booths held more memories than he could count, and every scratch on the wooden tables told a story. Linda had appeared 2 years ago during his busiest hiring season, answering a hastily posted "Help Wanted" sign. She was different from his usual staff. Quieter, more focused, with tired eyes that held depths he couldn't quite read. She never joined the other employees for after work. Drinks never shared much about her personal life, but she worked harder than anyone he'd ever employed. Customers loved her gentle manner and genuine smile, especially the elderly regulars, who often lingered over coffee just to chat with her. She remembers everyone's order, his assistant manager Jake had told him once. Mrs. Peterson doesn't even have to ask anymore. Linda just brings her tea with extra honey and toast, no butter. It's like she really cares about these people. That caring nature was exactly what made the missing money so painful. Thomas had tried to rationalize it away. Maybe the new point-of-sale system had glitches. Maybe Jake was making errors during shift changes. But deep down, he'd noticed the pattern. Money went missing only on Linda's shifts. Only when she worked alone during closing DOT last Tuesday, he'd decided to test his theory. He'd left exactly $347 in the register and made sure Linda was the only one with access after 8 p.m. The next morning, there was $320. $27 had vanished, just like the EI to other times. "I hate this," Thomas muttered to himself as he positioned the final camera behind the coffee machine. At his age, he should be thinking about retirement, maybe traveling to see his grandchildren in Seattle. Instead, he was playing detective with an employee he'd grown to trust and respect. Linda arrived for her evening shift at exactly 400 p.m. Just like always, she tied her graying brown hair back with the same worn scrunchie, straightened her name tag, and began her routine of checking salt shakers and wiping down menus. Thomas watched her move efficiently between tables, stopping to chat with old Mr. Franklin about his arthritis, bringing extra crackers to the young mother struggling with twin toddlers. "Evening rush should be light tonight," Linda said, approaching the counter where Thomas stood reviewing receipts. "Weather's keeping folks home." He studied her face for any sign of guilt or nervousness, but found only the same weary kindness he'd grown accustomed to. Her uniform was pressed despite being years old, her shoes worn but polished. Everything about Linda spoke of someone trying, hard to maintain dignity despite difficult circumstances. As Thomas prepared to leave for the evening, Linda was already taking orders from the dinner crowd. She moved with practiced grace, balancing plates and conversations with equal skill. In a few hours, he'd have his answers, But watching her now, treating every customer like family, he almost hoped the cameras would prove him wrong. Dot. The next morning, Thomas arrived at the diner earlier than usual, his stomach knotted with dread. The cameras had recorded everything, and he'd soon know the truth about Linda's after-hours activities. Jake was already there, prepping for the breakfast. Rush humming off key while he arranged pastries in the display case. "Morning, boss." "You're here early," Jake called out, not looking up from his work. "Couldn't sleep," Thomas replied, which was entirely true. He tossed and turned all night, alternating between anger at being betrayed and sadness at losing someone. He'd grown to care about Dot. Thomas retreated to his small office behind the kitchen and powered up his laptop. The camera software showed 4 different angles of the restaurant floor, each timestamp, marking Linda's movements from the previous evening. He fast-forwarded through the dinner rush, watching Linda serve customers with her usual attentiveness, clearing tables, refilling coffee cups. Datikio. At 10 p.m., the last customer left. Linda began her closing routine, wiping down tables and chairs, sweeping the floor, washing dishes. Everything appeared normal until 10:47 p.m. Thomas leaned forward, his emo heart sinking as he watched Linda approach the cash register. This was it, the moment that would confirm his suspicions. Dot. But instead of opening the register, Linda pulled out her phone and made a call. Even without audio, Thomas could see the worry etched on her face. She paced behind the counter, one hand pressed to her forehead, nodding and shaking her head in response to whoever was speaking. The conversation lasted nearly 10 minutes. Dot. After hanging up, Linda did open the register. Thomas's jaw clenched as he watched her count out bills, $27. Exactly what had gone missing. But instead of pocketing the money, Linda walked to the kitchen and returned with a white paper bag. She placed the cash inside the bag along with what appeared to be leftover food from the warming trays. Dot. This wasn't theft. This was something else entirely. Dot. Linda gathered her purse and coat, but instead of leaving through the front door as usual, she headed toward the back exit. Thomas switched to the exterior camera view and watched her walk to an old sedan parked in the alley. She sat in the car for several minutes, her head resting against the steering wheel shoulders, shaking in what looked like exhaustion or tears. Dot. Finally, Linda drove away the white bag sitting on her passenger seat. Thomas stared at the frozen screen, his mind racing. Linda wasn't stealing. She was buying food with her own money, or at least paying for food she was taking. But why the secrecy? Why not simply ask for a discount, or take advantage of the employee meal policy he'd established years ago? He scrolled back through previous night's footage, looking for patterns he'd missed. There it was, the same routine repeated over and over. Linda working late, making phone calls that clearly distressed her, taking food and leaving money behind, always the exact amount that had gone missing from his mental tallies. Dot. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. Sometimes the stories we tell ourselves aren't the whole truth, and sometimes kindness wears disguises we don't recognize. Dot. But the biggest revelation was yet to come, and Thomas knew he had to follow Linda to understand what was really happening. Dot. Thomas couldn't concentrate on anything else that day. The image of Linda's exhausted face haunted him as he went through the motions of running his restaurant. Every time she smiled at a customer or efficiently handled an order, he found himself studying her with new eyes. The woman he'd suspected of theft was clearly carrying a burden far heavier than stolen money. Dot. By closing time, Thomas had made his decision. Instead of going home to his empty house, he waited in his car across the street, feeling somewhat foolish, but determined to understand. At 10:30, Linda's sedan pulled into the alley behind the diner. Thomas watched her repeat the same routine he'd witnessed on camera: the phone call, the worried pacing, the careful counting of money and packing of food. When Linda drove away, Thomas followed at a distance, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. His late wife Helen would have called this an invasion of privacy, but Helen would have also told him to trust his instincts about people. And his instincts were now telling him that Linda needed help, not accusations. Linda, quote, S route took them through the older part of town, past houses with small yards and aging facades. She finally pulled into the driveway of a modest bungalow with peeling paint and a porch light that flickered uncertainly. Thomas parked half a block away and watched as Linda hurried to the front door, the white bag clutched in her arms. Through the living room window, Thomas could see Linda embrace someone, a small, elderly woman with silver hair. Even from this distance, he could observe the tenderness in Linda's movements as she helped the older woman to what appeared to be the kitchen table. Linda unpacked the bag, arranging the diner's familiar containers and counting out the money she'd left behind. For nearly an hour, Thomas watched Linda move around the house. She helped the elderly woman eat clean dishes and appeared to be preparing medication. The scene was so intimate and caring that Thomas began to feel guilty for intruding. Yet he couldn't bring himself to leave. At one point, Linda stood at the kitchen sink, her shoulders sagging with exhaustion. The elderly woman, who Thomas now realized must be Linda's mother, came up behind her and patted her arm with the uncertain movements of someone whose mind wasn't entirely present. Linda turned and hugged her mother gently, and even through the window, Thomas could see them both crying. The pieces finally clicked together. Linda's constant fatigue, her reluctance to socialize with other employees, her need for extra shifts, her careful attention to elderly customers who reminded her of challenges she faced at home. She was caring for someone with what appeared to be dementia or Alzheimer's, buying dinner from the restaurant because she didn't have time to cook, paying for it with money from tips or her wages. Have you ever faced something like this, watching someone you love slip away while trying to hold everything else together? Let us know in the comments. Thomas sat in his car until Linda's house went dark, understanding now that his employee hadn't been stealing from him. She'd been sacrificing everything for someone who meant more to her than her own comfort or reputation. The next morning, Thomas arrived at work with a plan that had kept him awake most of the night. He'd spent hours thinking about Linda, her mother, and the impossible situation they were navigating together. At 72, Thomas had learned that sometimes the most important business decisions had nothing to do with profit margins. Linda appeared for her shift, looking more tired than usual, her smile a little forced as she tied on her apron. Thomas watched her interact with the morning regulars, Mrs. Chen getting her usual oatmeal with brown sugar, young Bobby Martinez excitedly showing Linda his loose tooth. She gave each person her full attention, despite whatever exhaustion she was carrying. "Linda, could I speak with you privately?" Thomas asked, during the lull between breakfast and lunch rushes. Her face went pale, and she glanced nervously at the cash register. "Of course, Mr. Mitchell. Is everything all right?" They sat in a quiet corner booth, the same red vinyl where Thomas had made countless important decisions over the years. Linda's hands were folded tightly in her lap, and he could see the tension in her shoulders. "I need to tell you something," Thomas began carefully. "I installed security cameras because money was going missing during evening shifts." Linda's eyes widened and she started to speak, but Thomas held up a gentle hand. "I watched the footage, Linda. I saw what you were really doing." Tears immediately sprang to her eyes. "Mr. Mitchell, I can explain. I always left money. I never stole anything. I know I should have asked permission, but you don't need to explain anything to me about taking care of your mother." The words hung in the air between them. Linda stared at him, confusion and relief wearing across her face. "I followed you home last night. Thomas admitted. I saw you caring for her, and I understood everything. Your mother has Alzheimer's, doesn't she? Linda nodded, tears now flowing freely. For 3 years now. Some days she knows me, some days she doesn't. She can't be left alone anymore, but the adult daycare centers are so expensive and the waiting lists. Her voice broke. I've been working as many shifts as possible to save money, but by the time I get home, everything's closed. The diner's food was the only way I could make sure she ate something decent. Thomas reached across the table and patted her hand, the way his own father might have done decades ago. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ask for help? Because I need this job, Linda whispered. If you knew how complicated my life was, if you thought I couldn't handle the work, I can't afford to lose this position. The insurance helps pay for her medications, and I need every hour I can get. Thomas sat back, thinking about his own parents, who had passed away before reaching the age where they might have needed this kind of care. He thought about Helen and how he would have done anything to give her more time. Linda, what if I told you we could find a solution that helps both your mother and you? If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales like this one. Linda looked up at him with cautious hope, not daring to believe that this conversation might end differently than she'd feared. 3 weeks later, Mitchell's diner looked almost exactly the same, but everything had changed in ways that mattered most. The morning rush buzzed with its usual energy, but now there was an extra table in the corner, a special spot where Linda's mother, Carmen, sat each day from 10:00 a.m. to 6:00 p.m. Thomas had restructured Linda's schedule so she could bring Carmen to work with her. The elderly woman helped with simple tasks like folding napkins or sorting silverware, activities that gave her purpose while keeping her mind gently engaged. On her clearer days, Carmen charmed customers with stories from her youth in Puerto Rico. And on difficult days, she simply sat quietly while Linda worked nearby. She thinks I'm her sister some mornings, Linda had explained to Thomas during their first week with the new arrangement. But she always knows she's safe here. The other employees had embraced Carmen completely. Jake made sure her coffee cup was never empty and even brought in a comfortable cushion for her chair. The regular customers had adopted her as the diner's unofficial grandmother, stopping by her table to chat and share photos of their own families. Thomas discovered that having Carmen around had transformed his restaurant in unexpected ways. Families lingered longer. Children were gentler in her presence, and the entire atmosphere had become warmer and more connected. The diner wasn't just serving food anymore. It was serving as a community gathering place in the truest sense. You know what the best part is? Linda told Thomas one afternoon as they watched Carmen carefully arranging sugar packets in perfect rows. She remembers this place. Even when she forgets my name, she remembers that this is where she feels safe and useful. Thomas nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. He'd built this diner to be a place where people belonged, where families could create memories over shared meals. Watching Carmen find joy in simple tasks, seeing Linda's relief at being able to care for her mother while maintaining her independence. This was what community really meant. The financial impact had been minimal. Thomas had formalized Linda's employee meals as part of her benefits package and adjusted her schedule to accommodate Carmen's needs. The small changes had cost him almost nothing, but had given Linda and Carmen everything they needed. One evening, as Thomas was preparing to close, he found Linda and Carmen looking through an old photo album at their corner table. Carmen was pointing to pictures and sharing memories that were still crystal clear, while Linda listened with the patience of someone who treasured every moment of clarity. "Mr. Mitchell." Carmen called out, her voice strong and present. "Thank you for letting me help in your restaurant. It makes me feel important again." Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. At 72, he'd learned that the most valuable things in life couldn't be counted in a cash register. They were measured in moments like these in dignity, preserved in families supported, and in communities that chose to care for each other.